All right. Well, good night. I'm sorry. Good evening, good night, wherever it is that you are. Welcome to Getting Started with We the People and Project Citizen. My name is Emily Voss. I am the Senior Manager of National Events and Professional Learning at the Center for Civic Education. I'm delighted to have you with us as we kick off a brand new school year of civic learning. So tonight's session is all about helping you start strong. And we are happy to welcome you, whether you are brand new to We the People or brand new to Project Citizen, or looking for fresh ideas to reinvigorate your teaching. Tonight, you'll have a chance to hear from our featured scholar on the importance of civic education in today's democracy. And then you'll have a chance to hear from two awesome educators who will share their best tips and their practical strategies for launching these programs in your classroom. So we can also briefly mention that if you are brand new to the Center for Civic Education, the Center for Civic Ed is currently celebrating its 60th anniversary. We started back in 1965, and we are a nonprofit, which is our goal is to advance civic and constitutional education. We have two flagship programs, We the People and Project Citizen, which you'll learn a little bit more tonight. But both of those programs are grounded in primary source research and student inquiry. They've reached millions of students and teachers nationwide, and we are happy to have you join them. All right. So, as I mentioned, we have three amazing presenters for you this evening. We have Dr. Francene Engel, who I'll introduce at greater length in just a moment. We have Chanel Rogers, who is a mentor teacher from Mount Pleasant Elementary in Newcastle, Delaware. And then Jessica Mahoney, who is our other mentor teacher from Norview High School in Norfolk, Virginia. And so thanks to them both for being here with us this evening. All right, so I'm going to stop my screen share here so I can introduce Francene Engel. So Dr. Francene Engel received her PhD in political science from the University of Southern California. She's taught courses in American constitutional law, civil rights and liberties, constitutional theory, women and the law, and American government at the University of Maryland, the University of Michigan, Baylor University, and the University of Southern California. She was also a Fulbright scholar teaching in Poitiers, France. Her work has extended far beyond the classroom. Dr. Engel has contributed to civic and history assessments, including the National Assessment of Educational Progress exam in civics, and has served as a civics education consultant for the Maryland State Department of Ed, Virginia Civics, James Madison's Montpelier, George Washington's Mount Vernon, Educational Testing Services, the American Institutes for Research, and the Center for Civic Ed. She's passionate about making complex constitutional issues understandable to everyone, and we are so pleased that she is here to join us this evening. And I would love to encourage folks that if you have questions for Dr. Engel along the way, to please go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of her talk. So Francene, the floor is yours.
All right, let me get my screen share. All right, can everybody see my screen? Yes, you can see the screen.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So thank you so much for having me here tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming. I know everybody's busy, but I especially want to thank the teachers. And because I know as teachers, very often you work very hard, and unfortunately, you're sometimes underappreciated. So I thank you for everything that you do. So tonight we're going to talk about the importance of civic education. And I want to tell you that you, as social studies teachers, are actually the hero of this story. As far as civic education and as far as safeguarding our constitutional democracy, you as social studies teachers are crucial. And you should not sort of underestimate your importance in all of this. So, over the last 20 years, unfortunately, civic education has become less prioritized in the American education system. Now, this may vary from state to state, and even within states, it may vary from school district to school district. So you might say, well, my school is wonderful. We have spent tons of money on social studies education, and it's a very high priority. And if that's the case, I'm very happy for you and your school. But overall, nationwide, this really is not the story. And this is not purely anecdotal information. We have statewide studies that have documented this and have shown that instruction time in social studies has decreased over the last 20 years. Money and resources that are being put into professional development for social studies teachers has decreased. And just generally overall, social studies is considered a sort of a lower priority subject. Now, why is this? Well, of course, everybody says COVID for everything, and I'm sure COVID did have an impact on things, but there's actually a little bit more to the story. So in 2002, you may remember No Child Left Behind, which was signed in January of 2022 by President George W. Bush. And the emphasis on No Child Left Behind was trying to increase reading and math scores, particularly in the elementary levels. Now, this is a very noble goal, okay? But unfortunately, one of the things that did happen is being that reading and math were prioritized, we also know that science and social studies started to take a back seat. Many schools, because they needed to increase their reading and their math scores, basically were not teaching much social studies. And we do have evidence to back this up, to show that instructional time decreased specifically because of No Child Left Behind. Also, in 2009, you may remember President Obama had the Educate to Innovate initiative, and there was a lot of emphasis placed on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. Again, nothing wrong with those subjects, very noble goals. But when STEM, everything was every curriculum, everything within schools, they were trying to show that there was a STEM influence. And so more money was going towards those subjects and less money was going towards social studies. Now, a lot of people were complaining about that. And so you may remember in some places it became STEAM. They added the A, which was for the liberal arts. And that included everything else: social studies, art, music, physical education. So they kind of put STEAM in there, but everybody knew that the A was pretty much low priority, right, for the most part. So this is what's happening. And one of the things that we're noticing is recent studies have shown that civic knowledge has been on the decline. And it's on the decline with students, and it's also on the decline with you as adults. And that really makes sense, because if social studies is a lower priority subject, if less instructional time has been happening over the last 20 years, we can't expect students to know this information if it's not being taught in schools, right? So we know NAEP, for example. NAEP, which I actually worked on the NAEP civics exam back when they had, for the 2006 assessment, I was the lead item developer for that. And so in NAEP, in the last NAEP assessment in 2022, only 22% of eighth graders were proficient or above in civics. Now, I'll tell you, NAEP scores have never been high, but 22% of eighth graders are proficient or above. And I also will let you know that proficient is not a lot of information, right? To get a proficient score, you have a pretty elementary understanding of things. So it's really, even being proficient is not that impressive, okay? Also, we have studies showing that civic knowledge among adults seems to be going down. So there was an Annenberg study not that long ago saying that less than 47% of adults could name all three branches of government. And 25% of them could not name even one branch of government. Now, even that, I would say, is not really a great indicator of civic knowledge, because even among those 47% that could name all three branches of government, that does not mean that they have much civic knowledge, right? Um, I'm kind of a government nerd. And so my kids, when they were little, I talk about the three branches of government. And when they were very little, they could tell me what the three branches of government were. They didn't really understand government though, right? So the fact that somebody that 47% can name all three branches of government, again, really doesn't tell us how much knowledge they truly have. The other thing to keep in mind is studies have shown that there is virtually no partisan difference in civic knowledge. So if you ask these questions to Republicans, about the same number of people know them as Democrats. So it's, don't think whatever political party, we're the smart ones and it's the other ones that really don't have this civic knowledge. There's virtually no partisan difference within that. Okay, so we know social studies has been less emphasized. We know social studies knowledge, civic knowledge is on the decline. Oops, went ahead. Now, this is problematic, right? Because if people don't have the knowledge and understanding of how our political systems work, how are the people supposed to protect constitutional democracy? As Justice David Souter warned us a number of times before his death, said that democracy dies in ignorance, right? And so if you are ignorant of what is in the Constitution, if you are ignorant of what your government can and cannot do, if you don't understand basic concepts in the Constitution, how are you as citizens going to be able to safeguard constitutional democracy? So this is a little scary and problematic, in my opinion. Now, the fragility of democracy, constitutional democracy, is not something that's new. It's not something that we didn't understand. There is a famous quote of Benjamin Franklin that after the Constitutional Convention, he met with a reporter and she asked, what kind of government did we have? Wondering, did we have a monarchy? Did we have a republic? And his answer is a republic if you can keep it. So he recognized, and I think all the founding fathers recognized, that having a republic might be great, having a constitutional democracy might be great, but it's really hard to keep. And it really depends on the people to understand what's going on and to protect that constitutional democracy. So you might say, well, our Constitution, it's been 236 years since it's been ratified. We're probably pretty safe, right? No, think of Rome, right? You had the republics of Rome existed almost 500 years. It still can collapse. So this is something that we need to pay attention to. It's something that we need to be concerned about. Now, ultimately, in the Constitution, we have authority in terms of popular sovereignty, meaning who has ultimate authority? The people. And so it's the people's ultimate responsibility to safeguard our constitutional democracy. And again, if the people are not aware of how the Constitution works, if they are not aware of what is happening in our democracy, we can't expect them to actually protect it. All right, so this leads me to Eminem. And I'm here to tell you that even though sort of what I've told you might sound a little dim, we don't have to worry because we have you all here, all you social studies teachers that are here, and you really are going to be the ones who save the day and really help us protect our constitutional democracy. So I have this from Eminem, from his song Lose Yourself, where he talks about you have this one shot, you have this one opportunity, you're given one moment. What do you do with it? And I put this in here because back when I used to teach American government, most people at universities and political science departments don't want to teach American government. That's kind of considered, oh, that's the worst class you could possibly get. And the reason why is you have a lot of people in those classes who are not interested in the topic. They are taking it as a elective, or it's, just a requirement to take one social science class to graduate. And so they don't really have a lot invested into it. And so I always looked at it as, look, this is my one opportunity to reach these students because they may never take another social science class again. And if I don't light a fire in them right now and I don't get them to understand why it's important, I've missed my one shot. This is my one shot, my one chance in a lifetime to try to make a difference. And it's the same thing for you. Many of your students, depending on what grade you teach, maybe they do have a chance in the future to have more classes in social sciences. If you're a high school teacher, this might be your one chance. That student that you're teaching may not go to college. They may never be asked to think about these things again. They may go to college, right? And they might not take, American government for their social science elective. They might take, I don't know, psychology, right? And they may never really be forced to think about this again. So that's why you have to realize how important your job is as an educator to know that this is your one opportunity to make a difference, all right? So don't miss your chance. Now, if you don't like M&M, and I know a lot of you are social studies teachers, right? You might relate more to Hamilton, but it's the same idea. I'm not throwing away my shot, right? You have one shot with these students, miss it, okay? So that is my message to you. And the thing is, you have great opportunity to try to make a change. All right, so what are you supposed to do with this one shot that you have? Ultimately, what you want to try to do is you want to try to teach the idea of informed engagement. So what exactly does that mean? Informed. So that means that your students need to understand how the government works. They need to understand what's in the Constitution, right? They have to have opinions that are based in fact, right? They have to also be engaged. So they have to be able to take that information you give them and then put it into action. It might be something simple like voting, right? But they also need to figure out, what else can I do between elections to try to make an impact? So you have to teach them how to be informed, and you have to be how to be engaged. All right, now here's the thing. A lot of people out there believe that they have informed engagement. And I'm here to tell you that they don't, okay? So your job is to teach them how to have that informed engagement. Why do some people think that they have informed engagement? Well, a lot of people say, I have opinions, right? They have very strong opinions on political issues. Well, I'm here to tell you, having an opinion means nothing, right? If it's not based in fact, if it's not based in evidence. And there's a lot of people out there that have very strong opinions, but it's not based in any constitutional principles, or at least not ones that are actually in our Constitution. Maybe they make them up in their head, right? But that's not an informed opinion. They also might think that they have informed engagement because they follow the news of the day, right? But we know that our news out there now is not always that accurate. It is not always that reliable. And a lot of people don't actually have the skills to figure out, is this a reliable news source or not? Again, this is where you come and save the day as social studies teachers, because you can teach them how to do this. And it's so crucial that you do this, or else they're going to go into the world and they're not going to have these skills. So 54% of Americans, according to this recent study by the Pew Research Organization, 54% of Americans get their primary news sources from social media. And when we say social media, the top ones are Facebook and YouTube. Now, I don't know if you're on Facebook or not, but a lot of the stuff that's political on Facebook is not real accurate, right? But for many people, they're not reading the New York Times, right? They are not watching reliable news sources. They're getting it off of Facebook. And of those people, 20% of them are getting their primary news from social media influencers. Now, it might be a social media influencer that actually has validity and knows something, but it could also just be the popular person of the day who's giving their opinion, right? So we need to teach our students what is accurate and what is not accurate. Okay. Also, we know from these studies that people that get their primary news from social media are the least informed and actually the least engaged, right? So the main thing that you need to teach your students, and the wonderful thing about the Center for Civic Education's curriculum that they have, is you need to teach them critical thinking skills. So all of this comes back to having the necessary critical thinking skills to analyzing what's going on in the world. Okay, so we want to have informed opinions. What does that mean? That means that your opinions have to be based on knowledge and evidence, right? It means that you have to understand and have given considerate weight and consideration to opposing viewpoints. You have to understand why the opinions that you reject are flawed and not convincing, right? And then also, in terms of making constitutional arguments, you need to be able to base your arguments on founding principles rather than on just your own personal moral code. And that's a wonderful thing about the We the People textbook and the Project Citizen textbook is these books, they all start with American founding principles, with first principles. And so your students will get a lot of information about that. And then throughout the semester, throughout the year, you're able to tie these founding principles to all your discussions that you have. Okay, I would like to make the argument that informed engagement is one of the most patriotic actions that any American can take. Okay, serving your country, even better than that. But for many people, it's, well, I fly the flag, right? And again, that's patriotic, right? But having informed engagement is one of the most important things that you can do. And this is something that the founding fathers talked about from the beginning. If you think of Thomas Jefferson, he has a quote where he says, whenever people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. Meaning that when they're not well informed, they really can't be trusted, right? So it's important. And a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny, right? Tyranny is when one person or one institution has too much power and they're able to operate outside of a system of checks and balances. So these are things that even from the beginning, the founding fathers were concerned about. So what are some of the requirements that you need for informed engagement? Well, your citizens must understand how government works, right? And what I mean by that, you just have to understand the basics of things. And I've used this example other times spoken, but to give you an example, I am on my homeowners association in my community, and we have a lot of people that come to the meetings, and they're very engaged in terms of pay attention to what's going on in the community. And one of the things that irritates people when they come is we have a county ordinance that says before you cut down a tree, you have to show that it's actually dead. And so you actually have to get somebody from the county to come out and make sure the tree is dead before you cut it down. And that's for us because we're in a nature preserve. And people complain about this all the time. So the day after the last presidential election, we had a homeowners association. And a man who comes all the time, is very engaged, says, oh, thank goodness President Trump won the election. We are not going to have to put up with this stuff with the trees anymore because he's just not going to put up with this. He's going to put an end to that right away. And everybody at the meeting is, yeah, yeah, he won't put up with that. And I about almost fell out of my chair. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, that's not how government works, right? Um, President Trump is at the national level. We're talking about a local ordinance. He's not going to change what's happening with the trees, right? So here's somebody who I think believes he has very strong informed engagement, but he doesn't understand the basics of government, right? So you got to understand the basics of government, okay? And the textbooks that the center has clearly are going to do that. The other thing is citizens must hold their elected representatives accountable, right? If you don't hold them accountable, nothing's going to change. Citizens must possess the skills to evaluate media sources, and citizens must have well-developed critical thinking skills. So those are the four things that I believe you need to teach students so that they would have informed engagement. And those are four things that if you use the Center for Civic Education's curriculum, they emphasize all of those things. And I'm just noticing they all say number 1 down the side, so I don't know what happened there. It's supposed to be 4. Okay, real quick, just to go through some of these things. Citizens must understand how government works. Okay, so they have to know what is in the Constitution and what is not in the Constitution. Why is this important? Because whoever is in government is going to try to tell you that they have powers in the Constitution that they might not have, right? There are things, and this happens a lot, pretty much with all presidents, they assert grand powers for themselves. And they say, well, it's not written in the Constitution, but I believe it's a properly implied power of the executive branch, right? And sometimes they don't even use that language. They just say, I'm president, I can do this, right? And if you don't know what's in the Constitution, it's very easy for politicians to try to strong arm people and take power grabs to try to get more power for themselves and authority. And they're kind of counting on the people being ignorant and allowing it to happen, right? So you have to sort of know what's in the Constitution, what's not in the Constitution. Once you understand the principles, you also have to understand how it works in political practice, right? So knowing the theory is one thing, you have to be able to see it in political practice. You have to understand what the constitutional principles are that are the foundation of the Constitution. And then you have to, again, be able to recognize when your members of government may be betraying those founding principles, right? So if you have, let's say you have a president doing something and, you know, your representative says, well, what are we going to do? There's nothing we can do. Well, if you understand checks and balances, you might be able to say, well, actually, there are things you can do. You can exercise your rights in checks and balances rather than just sitting back and letting this happen, right? Citizens must hold their elected officials accountable. Most important thing is you have to pay attention, right? A lot of people aren't really paying attention. They're paying attention to other things, right? Right now, everybody is paying attention to what the logo is for Cracker Barrel, right? Rather than what's really happening, right? So, and it's very easy to get the public onto things that really don't matter, right? So you have to pay attention to what your government is doing and what they're not doing. You remember that your government officials have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. And if they are not upholding that oath, you should be angry, right? And what should you do? You should vote them out of office, right? And if it's not time for election, you're calling them on the phone. You're protesting. You're doing whatever it is that you need to do, right? So you have to try to look at what they're doing. You have to figure out, are they acting what I call extra constitutionally, which means they're giving themselves powers that are not in the Constitution, and they are able to operate outside of a system of checks and balances, right? They can't do that. We have to hold them accountable. But again, if people don't know what's in the Constitution and what's not in the Constitution, it's very easy for them to act extra constitutionally. Also, if you don't know what's in the Constitution, it's very easy for your politicians to try to tell you that they have this authority when they don't, right? And so you have to be aware of that. Other things, you have to have the skills to evaluate media sources. So here's the problem. We as citizens must rely on the media to inform us because we don't have the time to go all around the world and investigate everything. We are dependent on the media to inform us and educate us. But unfortunately, a lot of our news sources, both journalistic news sources and social media, are not really accurate, right? So our students need to have the skills to be able to figure out what is reliable and what is valuable information, right? If they don't have these skills to evaluate the media, it just opens the door for potential abuses of government, right? And it's very easy for people to be manipulated, right? And that's the thing that's scary, is that if you don't have these skills, it's very easy for the people to not recognize that government is abusing its power, right? Because government is going to tell you they have the authority to do it. So the great thing about these curricula that you have with the Center for Civic Education is they put a lot of emphasis on media literacy, particularly the Project Citizen textbook. Throughout the entire textbook, there are lessons weaved in on media literacy. So I know that is something that's very important. I know that's something all of you are trying to teach now. And the good thing about the Project Citizen textbook and also the new We the People textbook that's coming out is there is an emphasis on media literacy. And ultimately, all of this comes down to having critical thinking skills. If you do not have well-developed critical thinking skills, none of it matters, right? And the best thing about the curricula from the Center for Civic Education is it demands that you have critical thinking skills. And as you go through the year, you will have no choice but to use those critical thinking skills. So it's going to teach you how to analyze sources, what's reliable, what's trustworthy. It's going to force you to be able to defend your position, right? You can have an opinion, but people are going to ask you for your evidence and how you support it. And they're going to ask you, well, what about this counter argument? And you're going to have to be able to explain why your opinion is better than the opinion that you are rejecting, right? When the We the People curriculum in particular with this simulated congressional hearings, if you can't do that, you're going to be really out of luck, right? And so here's the thing, you might not be able to do it at the beginning of the semester, but as you work at these skills, you do eventually develop these skills. The other thing is when you have your opinions, you can't just have arbitrary opinions because it fits your own personal moral code. You have to be able to tie it back to constitutional principles or first principles. And everything that is done within particularly the We the People and as well as Project Citizen is you have to be able to explain how this ties back to the Constitution and how this ties back to first principles. All right, so this kind of leads me to the different textbooks that you have access to. And one thing that I'd like to emphasize is both of these textbooks are nonpartisan. So that makes it easier as you're teaching it, that you don't have to worry about that you're promoting one political party over another, one idea over another. They all are going to have emphasis on the media literacy. They all are going to emphasize critical thinking skills. Basically everything that I was talking about that I think you really need to know is going to be in both of these textbooks. Another thing that I know teachers are dealing with right now is AI. And very often when students are writing papers, they're using AI the whole time, right? If you are doing a simulated congressional hearing, you might say, when I might write my statement, I can use AI, right? And maybe some might slip through the radar and they might actually use AI. But in your simulated congressional hearings at the end, you are going to have to answer questions from judges asking you questions about those topics that you talked about. And if you don't really understand it, you are not going to be able to answer those questions. So it's kind of like where the rubber meets the road here. So you might be able to use AI to get you through a little bit, but you are not going to be able to get through this curriculum if you unless you can stand on your own 2 feet and argue the issues and defend your position and explain why counter positions are wrong and how you can refute those counter positions, basically critical thinking skills, right? You cannot get through these curriculum if you do not have critical thinking skills. And I think that is the most important thing and most wonderful thing about both of these textbooks, right? Because again, for me, it all comes down to critical thinking skills. You might be able to teach kids to memorize facts. They might be able to say, oh, right, which case from the Supreme Court, um, you know, uh, had separate but equal, right? And then they could say, oh, Plessy versus Ferguson, right? So that's just sort of rote knowledge. But in this curriculum, you actually have to be able to talk about specific things. So you'd have to talk about the Equal Protection Clause. You have to understand what it means. And so that is the wonderful thing about this. So I know I am running out of time, but I do just want to remind you that whether you use this curriculum or not, as social studies teachers, you are doing a fabulous service to our society. And keep in mind that what you are doing is incredibly important. And I basically just want to remind you to not throw away your shot this year with your students, because our constitutional democracy is depending on you, our teachers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Francine. That was fantastic. What a great motivator to bring us to the beginning of our school year. That was fantastic. So, um, I'm just going to give another opportunity for folks to post any questions that you might have for Dr. Engel in the chat. Um, but while you're thinking about it, I will make sure that over the course of the next portion of our presentation, we talk a little bit more about the two different programs in case you are familiar with one but not the other, or in case they're both new to you. So just very briefly, We the People, the Citizen, and the Constitution. This is a supplemental curriculum that's typically used in social studies, civics, or government classes, and that introduces students to everything from the philosophical and historical understandings that the framers of the Constitution would have had while they were crafting the Constitution. It walks through what happened in the Philadelphia Convention. It does talk about the structure of the Constitution itself, the Bill of Rights, major cases, and then it also talks about current day challenges to the Constitution as well. And then Project Citizen is the sister curriculum, and Project Citizen focuses on public policy and how citizens go about using public policy to advocate for change within their communities. So that one is very much a how-to focused curriculum, and it is both of them are very heavily project-based learning focused. And our two teachers will talk about that more fully. All right. So it looks like we have, oh, this is great. Thank you so much for posting some questions. So we have a question from Deanna, and she says, I work for a digital school, remote school. We're able to make Model UN work, but struggling to find ways to make one of these programs accessible to online or remote students. Are there any resources or guidance for a more complicated, non-traditional school? So I'm actually going to leave that as a seed for further discussion from our two educators. And if they have ideas, great. If not, I can add some in here at the end. But thank you so much, Francine. Okay. Looks like in the interest of time, I'm going to hand things over to one of our first mentor educators. So next up, we are joined by Jessica Mahoney, and she is a fourth-year social studies educator who teaches in Virginia, and she teaches U.S. history and AP psychology at Norview High School in Norfolk. She's a member of the iCivics Educator Network, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture's Teacher Advisory Council, and a teacher ambassador for Retro Report. And she also serves as an at-large board member of the Maryland Civic Education Coalition, the legislative and advocacy liaison for the Virginia Council for the Social Studies, and an educator consultant for the Center for Civic Ed. And Jessica's incredibly passionate about engaging students in history and civic life through hands-on, inquiry-based learning, and she advocates for elevating both teachers and student voices in educational policy at local and national levels. And she's with us tonight to talk about her best tips and tricks for launching Project Citizen within her classroom community and yours as well. So Jessica, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And before I get started, congrats and snaps to everyone who had their first day of school this week. I know I had mine last week, which is why my voice sounds so hoarse. So if this was your first week of school, you made it. It's on Tuesday. You're almost there. And I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay, so like Emily mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you all today about Project Citizen, which is one of those two different curriculums that you can use in your classroom. So to get started, I'm in my 4th year of teaching right now, and I have currently used Project Citizen for almost 3 years, and I have implemented it in a variety of different classroom situations. My first year of teaching, which I actually have an example of one of my student projects on the screen right now, I did that project in a middle school world history and ancient history class. So very much not aligned with like the traditional government course that you usually see with these kinds of projects. My first year of teaching high school, I actually did the project in a leadership course. So not even a class that was a history class at all. And again, had great success. And then more recently, I have done it in my Virginia US history course. So again, just to kind of show you that this project works in a diverse setting. And I can talk more about that later on during my presentation as well. Okay, so for Project Citizen, there are a multitude of ways that you can implement it in your classroom. What it is basically students come up with a policy proposal of something that they want to change in their community. And this can either be a year-long project, or what I often do is have it as kind of an end of year after the final exam project for students. I've done it in both ways and both have worked very well. I think what you can start to think about if you are interested in doing this kind of program is which works best for your curriculum. Like, for example, I know in my history course right now, we do have an end of year exam and we just don't have time to do it as a whole year project. But after the end of the exam, we have about a month of school where we don't really have anything to do in the curriculum. And so for me, this is a perfect kind of final project for the students to do. Now, to kind of get started on how I introduce this idea or this project to my students, because if you are in the classroom, you probably have the experience of when you try to introduce a project to the students, they start moaning and groaning about, oh, you're giving us so much extra work. Why are you doing this? But by introducing it this way, it seems that the kids actually do get interested in it, which is always a good sign. So what I usually do is I have a day before we even start the project where we talk about public policy. Like Francine mentioned, most Americans have very little insight into public policy. And in my classes, all of the students that I have, very few of them have ever taken a government course. Because usually I have them when they're sophomores and juniors. And in my region of Virginia, government is a senior course. So a lot of them never really learned about government, don't really know anything about it. And so before we dive in, I kind of want to give them that background information. Now, the way that I like to do it is I like to pick specific examples from history of students like themselves who come up with policies or laws or want to make change in their community and have actually been successful at doing it. So in Norfolk, we have a lot of really rich history around civil rights. And actually down the road from our region, we had the school that Barbara Johns, who is a pretty famous civil rights activist and who was a high school student when she kind of stepped into this role. She attended a school pretty close to my high school. And so I like to use her as kind of the entrance example for students to say, hey, this idea of trying to make change in the community, It's not just some big picture conversation that we're having. We can actually make real change, whether it be through this project or whatever project you might be interested in doing in your free time. Now, for Project Citizen, there are these 6 core steps, and I will have this up on my screen, the steps, as I go through the rest of my slides. So if you aren't super familiar with Project Citizen, this is going to be the way that you kind of guide your students through the entire experience. And I'm going to go step by step and kind of give you some insight on how I incorporate the project into my classroom for each of these 6 steps. So after I introduce the project and talk about public policy and the idea of making change in the community to my students, the next day of the activity, or the next time we spend on Project Citizen, is on step 1, where we identify a project or a problem, sorry. So for this aspect of the project, what I love to do with my students is just kind of have a brainstorming session. And we talk about what are some issues that they might have in their community, in their schools, or even in the country if they want to do a kind of bigger picture issue. Now, my recommendation, and the way that I've always done it in my classrooms, is I really recommend doing a school-based project or a school-based issue. And again, one of the reasons why I like to do it that way is, again, my students don't have a whole lot of background knowledge on government. And so, again, because I don't have as much time in my curriculum, I can't spend 2, 3, 4 days really diving deep into local government or national government. If you can, that's awesome. But just for me and my timeline, that doesn't really work as much. And so because of that, we focus on the school. So we have conversations. I let them kind of mull it over for a few days. And then when we move into step 2, that is where we kind of come to the table with the different ideas that we have. Okay. So what I ask students is, on the day that we move into step 2, which is usually about a day or 2 after we do step 1, each student has to come in with one problem. So I've had students do the food that they have for lunch. I've had students do the fact that some bathrooms are locked in my school and they think that that should not be the case. I've had topics about not giving homework in school. Basically anything in the school building or in the school day that bothers the students or that they think is wrong. Now, for these different topics, I let the students vote on which topic they want to pursue. Now, based on this vote, I cannot guarantee that that topic is going to be the final topic for the presentation. And we'll talk about why on the next slide. But I do want them to have this process of trying to convince each other, having those conversations to get to a consensus among the whole group that, hey, we've all come together and we decided that we want to do lunchroom food for our topic. Now, the way that I do this is through a ranked choice voting system. So everyone puts their issue on the table and we go through round after round until we end up with one topic. Now, for this part of the project, again, there is a lot of variation. So I have some colleagues who let their students have multiple topics. So maybe they do Project Citizen as a small group research project. In my classroom, I really enjoy doing it as a whole class assignment. Just because I feel like it really builds that sense of community with the students, that maybe even if you don't agree with this person, you're still going to have to work together with them. You're still going to have to come to a consensus with them versus the different groups all come kind of going off in their own direction. So after we come to our final decision, next thing we're going to do is step 3, and that is where you're gathering information on the problem. So for this aspect of the project, we do an assignment called Spheres of Impact. So we discuss the topic. So in this case, my example is that food lunch idea. And we think about who is impacted by this issue. Okay, so for in the case of school lunches, obviously students, cafeteria workers, food management people in the district, principals, teachers, anyone who could be impacted by this idea, janitors, because they might have to clean up the food after the kids eat it. And after we have a list of people who are involved, first thing we're going to do is try to interview those people. We want to hear from their perspective. What do they think about the topic or problem in the community that we're trying to solve? Now, the reason that's a really good first step to take is because after interviewing the principal or the cafeteria worker or whoever else might be involved, your students might get a pretty unique perspective and might realize that the issue that they're trying to do is one that actually makes sense the more that they learn about it. So, for instance, one of my student groups in a previous year wanted to do a project on unlocking all the bathrooms during the school day. Now, after they spoke to security and the school building principal, they kind of realized that, hey, there is a reason why this is in place in our school. And after that, we decided to pivot to a different topic. Now, again, it's important to do this as soon as you can in the project timeline because you don't want to be 3 months into the project and then your students realize, oh, actually, this isn't really a problem that we can solve, or maybe this issue isn't one that we should really be focusing on. Now, additionally, doing this sphere of impact assignment helps students to figure out who in the school building or in the district do they need to go to propose their policy change. So for instance, for the lunchroom food resources, originally students thought that they had to go to our building principal, that she was the one who could make change for that topic. But the more they researched, they realized that, hey, she actually isn't the person who decides what food we eat for lunch. And so then they shifted and decided to instead go to the district lead for food management for our district. Okay, so again, kind of doing these first initial steps makes it a lot easier down the line to ensure that both the topic that the students are doing and who they want to present their research to is actually effective. Okay, because remember, the whole big goal of Project Citizen is for students to propose some kind of policy change in their community. All right, so next up is step 4. And step 4 and 5 are where we're going to kind of dive into this idea of implementing this project in a regular classroom. Because this project sounds super fun, it's super exciting, but then when the rubber hits the road and you actually have to teach this project, you will see that you definitely are going to have to make some alterations depending on the population that you serve, what kind of school you work in, and a whole host of other diverse challenges that you might have. So step 4 in Project Citizen is developing a portfolio to present for your final presentation. Now, for my school, one of the big kind of factors that I have to consider when I do Project Citizen or when I do the We the People project is my school has a huge, very large population of newly arrived immigrant students who do not speak English, who are very low on their English acquisition. And by doing a whole big classroom project like this, that poses a real barrier to overcome for those kids because they might not feel comfortable researching an issue. They might not feel comfortable calling the school principal and having those conversations. And so when you do start to develop that portfolio, it's important to take into consideration what are the strengths of your different students. So the way that I like to do this is I give students a survey and I give them different activities, different roles that they can have in the portfolio creation, the project creation. And then after I read their submissions, I will assign them to different roles in their groups. So for example, if I have a student who really struggles with writing, maybe they're below literacy rate for their grade level. Instead of having them be the writer for their group's presentation, I'm going to have them be the designer for the slideshow or for the poster board that we're going to have for our final presentation. And that way they are still contributing, but they are doing it in a way that plays into their strength and allows them to really be a contributing member of their group society. Now, it is really important to take into consideration the needs of your students. Another thing that is a real barrier for me at my school is attendance. So if I have a kid who I know is very rarely in school, I'm not going to ask them to be the leader of their group's presentation because I don't want to put that pressure on them. And I also don't want to set up their peers for failure if the person who's in charge of wrangling everyone is only there half the time in school. All right. Now, this kind of need to customize your presentations plays into the next step, which is step 5. So in step 5, this is where you are presenting your portfolio to whatever audience you may select. So in these presentations, students are going to go through each of these 6 steps and kind of share with the person who is listening or visiting your school how they went through the process of selecting their policy, of researching their policy, and then they're going to propose a solution for the school or for the community. Now, as I said, I work in a very diverse school with a lot of different needs. And so for me, these portfolio presentations are going to look very different depending on the class that I'm doing it with or the year that I'm implementing the project. So for example, maybe I have students one year who are super confident, they know they're going to do a great job, and they might be really skilled at research, writing, and presenting. In that situation, they might feel more comfortable with me inviting outside community members into the school to hear their presentation. Now, in other years, maybe I have a lot of students who are those English learners, who they're really just trying to make it through the presentation, say a few things, and if they can do that, they are going to feel great about themselves. In that situation, maybe I just invite the school principal. Okay, so again, you want to make this project and this assignment basically as simple as possible for your students to feel good and feel confident in what they're doing. Now, in the presentation, at least in the ones in my classroom, I ask every student in each group to present. Okay, so for example, in group 1, who's talking about identifying the project or the problem, maybe I have 4 students who are in that group. The expectation that I have for their presentations is that each student speaks at least one time during their period of the presentation. Now, again, just like for the portfolio creation, I play into students' strengths. So again, if I have that student who is still learning English, maybe his or her role is just to introduce the title of their portion of the presentation or say the names of their peers in their group. And again, if they can just get through that, they're going to feel great about themselves and they're going to make their teammates proud. For example, last year I had a student who was nonverbal. And you can imagine if you have a student who is unable to speak, doing this kind of presentation might seem pretty daunting for them. So I worked with that student and I worked with the people who were in their group. And they actually came to a consensus as a group of students, that the student could use Google Translate, the audio for Google Translate, to share her part of the presentation. And the student felt really confident doing that and felt very comfortable, and their presentation was very successful. Now, another thing you might want to think about doing for this final section is the Q&A portion of your portfolio presentation. Traditionally, at the end of either the entire presentation or in some cases at the end of each of these 6 sections, your guest, whether it's your principal or community members or whoever you invite, tends to ask questions of the students. So for example, the students who are presenting the identifying problem, the guest might ask, okay, well, why did you pick this topic over that topic? What made you more interested in the lunchroom food versus the locking the bathroom doors? Again, if you have a group of students who feels really confident, especially in public speaking, you can just invite the guest to ask any school appropriate question to the students. Now, what I tend to do, again, because I have that large population of English learners in my classroom, is I have created certain questions that guests can pick from when they respond to the students. And I do that so that I can give those questions to my English learners ahead of time, and they have more time to prepare responses that they might feel comfortable sharing with the whole class, especially if they do want to share in English, because I know it takes them a little bit more time to think through and write through their ideas. Alrighty. Now, the last step of the 6 steps, as you can see down here, is the reflection piece. And this is done throughout the entire experience of Project Citizen, but specifically towards the end of the project. You want students to reflect on what was the whole experience like? Were there any setbacks that they faced? How did they overcome those setbacks? How did they grow as a group, as individuals? And what has changed in their understanding of their community or their school through doing this research and these presentations? Now, especially if you are doing a year-long project like I tend to do in my classroom, it is really helpful to, again, do these multiple reflection periods, especially if you really are trying to make change in your community. So for example, my first year when we did the lunchroom food, we actually proposed that idea to our principal and then to the district. Now, obviously, they were both very busy individuals, so it took them quite some time to get back to us. And so, even though we did our first reflection when the presentations happened, we did another one a few months later when we actually heard back from the two women that we had contacted. Now, in both of those situations, unfortunately, the students did not get to convince them to change the lunch menu. But even reflecting on that rejection was a really good chance for them to think and grow and maybe reflect on what else could we have done to either make our argument more persuasive or think of other ways to kind of really demonstrate to these two change makers in our school community that this is something that students really cared about. Now, the last thing I will say for the reflection piece and kind of for the project overall is this fear of public speaking. Now, again, if you're a teacher, number one, students hate projects. But then if you say it's a project where they have to talk in front of people, oh my God, it's like you're torturing them. It's truly a horrendous experience for them. And I have had that experience every year that I do this, even though students know that we do this project in my class, when I present it or bring it up to them, shocking. What I recommend doing is having mini presentations throughout the year. So for instance, last year for my midterm, so in the middle of the year, we had a hearing. It was about a totally different topic. It was actually about the progressive era, so totally unrelated to Project Citizen, but it had the same format where the entire class worked together and there were different groups that had to present different parts of their research. And I asked them questions after their presentation. So the exact same format that we were going to do for Project Citizen, but just for a different topic during the middle of the year. Now, what I saw when I implemented this strategy is number one, students felt so much better after doing the midterm because they realized that it really was not a scary experience at all. It was you go up, you talk for a few seconds, maybe a few minutes, you answer one or two questions, and then you sit down. The second thing that I really noticed a change in my students is their sense of community after this midterm assignment. It was incredible to see a bunch of juniors in high school cheering each other on for their presentations. And they were kind of like giving each other thumbs up, clapping for each other, saying like, you did awesome, you're so amazing, like you should be so proud of yourself. And just that experience really helped to build that community so that when we did the project in the end of the school year, whenever a kid had a doubt, whenever the kid shared that they were nervous about presenting in front of an audience or in front of guests, the other students in the class said, hey, you did it for the midterm, you did a great job. Like this is basically the same thing that we're doing now. And again, going back to what Francine said, like these are skills that students need to have. You can always argue, when am I going to use history class in real life? That's up for debate. There's clearly ways that you can, but you're always going to use public speaking. You're always going to have to talk to people. You're always going to have to use research. And so giving students these skills is a great way for them to take these ideas and these activities and skills that they've gained and really prepare them for life after high school, life after college, and whatever they do once they leave your classroom. Now, final thoughts. Project Citizen shouldn't be seen as a competition. The groups are not competing against each other. If you have multiple classrooms in a school who are doing this, don't frame it like their students are competing against the other groups. You're seeing it, or the students should see it as an experience for them to grow and expand their understanding of themselves and their communities. And whether or not the policy that they are proposing is implemented, students should be able to walk away saying that they learned something from this project, whether it's how their school government works, whether it's how their local government works, whether it's just how to be a better community member in their classroom, or how to support their peers, or how to public speak in a more confident way. No matter how you implement this project, students will walk away with a changed perspective, either on themselves or the school or world around them. And in the 3 years that I have done it, I have never had a single kid who at the end of the project was like, dang, I wish we had never done that. In fact, I've even had kids who shared in their college essays and in their conversations with me that these types of projects really inspire them to get more involved in their community and maybe even pursue careers or volunteer experiences, working to volunteer or create change in whatever region they might see as lacking in the world around them. All right, that is it for me. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a really fantastic walkthrough and lots of different modification opportunities depending on your students and their specific needs. And we've also had a few ideas floating back and forth in the chat as well with regards to particular student setups that we can certainly use for the Project Citizen project as well. But thank you so much. That was truly fantastic. And I think to Francine's earlier point, a super important part of Project Citizen is the action plan. So the students do think through multiple avenues that they can pursue when it comes to contacting their, whether it's the school board, elected officials, town council members. That can be part of the action plan, but it's also important to have them realize that just because you email them once doesn't mean they're going to respond, and that sometimes informed action means you need to keep at it. So I want to put that out there as well to Francine's first point. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, and I'm sure you'll still be available to take questions in the chat if folks still have questions for you. But I want to make sure we hand the floor to Chanel Rogers. She is the Dean of Students and Equity Champion at Mount Pleasant Elementary School in the Brandywine School District in Newcastle, Delaware. And she serves as a mentor teacher for the Civics That Empowers All Students program. She holds a Master's of Education from Wilmington University. Prior to her current role, she has worked in the Colonial and Christina school districts, and she's deeply committed to advancing equity in education and empowering students to find their voice in civic life, which we love. And tonight she'll be sharing her tips and tricks for launching We the People. So, Chanel, the floor is yours.
Okay, so let me begin by sharing my screen and starting my slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about getting started with We the People in your classroom. So thank you for that introduction. I do have a change. I'm not at Mount Pleasant Elementary School anymore. I'm at Lancashire Elementary School. I'm an instructional dean, and this is my third year working with C's and We the People, and it has been life-changing, not only on a professional level, but on a personal level as well. So I owe a lot of my growth in the last 3 years to working with C's and the We the People program. So my passion and my purpose in education is equity, access, opportunity, and representation. And I definitely believe that civics opens that door. So, I also like to talk about the 7 habits of happy kids and 7 habits of happy people. So we're going to start with habit number 2, which is beginning with the end in mind. And that's the overall program goal for We the People. And it's to prepare students for effective and responsible participation in our democratic society. We the People foster civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions as critical thinking, analytical skills, public speaking, civic responsibility, and participation. So the Center for Civic Ed says that We the People is a comprehensive curriculum. It increases students' understanding and willingness to use democratic processes, manage public and private conflicts, build civic values, democratic citizenship, and the most important part to me, the one that stands out to me, is to help students improve their capacity to make intelligent choices for themselves, to learn how to think rather than what to think. So that is an important part of the process that We the People helps our students to build. Furthermore, beginning with the end in mind, sometimes we work backwards and we start with the assessment first, and we work from there. So a part of the assessment for the We the People curriculum is the built-in performance assessment, such as the simulated congressional hearing. So this allows students to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of the constitutional principles. They evaluate, take, and defend positions on relevant historical contemporary issues. So you have your students who act as witnesses and testify on their constitutional knowledge based on their learning of the We the People curriculum. And you have a volunteer judge panel who are adults from the community that will hear the students present. They ask follow-up questions and offer feedback. As someone mentioned earlier, Francine mentioned earlier, you can use AI to get through that first part of it. However, when it comes to those follow-up questions that the judges will be asking the students, they definitely have to have that core knowledge and that deeper understanding of those constitutional principles. So it is motivating, engaging, digital, and evidence-based. And here you can see a picture of my students. This was my very first simulated congressional hearing that I held. And I was very proud of these students because it was an inclusion classroom. A lot of students with varying academic and behavioral needs, and they crushed it. So I'm super proud of this picture. And this was the start to my C's journey. Yeah, super proud of that picture. So how do we get there? How do we get to the point where our students, they have done the learning through the We the People curriculum, and now it's time for that performance-based assessment. And we want them to get up in front of people, be that expert witness, and share what they have learned. We gotta be proactive and put first things first. That's habit 1 and habit 3. And we gotta start with building that relational capacity. We know that no significant learning can happen without significant relationship. So we have to start with building those relationships with our students and helping build and foster those relationships between student to student. So what is relational capacity? It's about connection, respect, trust, and authenticity. And in order to really build what is needed to have your students participate in these congressional hearings and participate in some of the activities that We the People offers, you need all 4 of those things. So with relational capacity, you have 4 stages of relational capacity. The first one is safe shaping. That is that stage your students are just coming in. They're getting to know each other. It's kind of like the stage we're in now, the first week of school. There's low risk and there's high comfort and engaging to initiate the process of forming connections. So that is where you have activities and strategies such as would you rather, diversity bingo, true or false. You're starting to build those connections. You're trying to build that safe space. Then we have stage 2, that's that controlled chaos. It's kind of my favorite stage because this is where you have that moderate risk, moderate comfort. Students are working to like manage conflicts. You're working as a teacher to maintain a positive environment. They're semi taking risks here and there, and there's some conflicts that you need to step in as a teacher. So this is where you prepare strategies for your students like think pair shares, mix pair shares, Pictionary, telephone. One of the other mentors in Delaware, she is on an improv group. So she prepares improv activities for the students to participate in, which really helps to build student confidence and connection with the simulated congressional hearings. You have stage 3 that's called scope and sovereignty. That's where you have some high risk and low comfort. And this is where students start inserting themselves. So it becomes more student centered. So here's where you want to start with those open-ended questions, those listening circles, and problem-solving circles. And then you have stage 4. That's group actualization. That is where you need to be in order to have successfully worked on and complete your simulated congressional hearing. So here's to activities to kind of work on in that stage. We have philosophical chair, Paideia seminars, and then you have your simulated congressional hearings where trust and honesty is elevated, and the teacher, you, is only there as a source of feedback. So here's how I do it. I start with building my groups from day 1, week 1. That way I can not only build relational capacity within my classroom, but I'm building relational capacity within those groups as well. So we work on naming our team and we work on team building. We identify the team strengths early on, like Jessica mentioned. So we have students who are great at writing, students who are great at public speaking, students who are great at research. We have students who are great at designing things and making things. So we identify strengths early on so that each student can be a piece to the puzzle. One thing that we do, and I can't take credit for the resources that I'm sharing because I've gathered all these resources from Delaware mentors and Maryland mentors and Florida mentors. So you develop a class or group constitution. So that group works together and they develop their own constitution and they stick to it. They stick to what they decided that their group is going to follow. And then you integrate these strategies and concepts cross-curricular. So across the different curriculums, across your different blocks and across your different settings, you can use these groups to help build that team, and you can integrate these strategies in different settings as well. So here is just what that looks like. You can give this sheet to your teams, and then they can talk about members of the group who feel comfortable speaking up, members who enjoy social studies, members who proofread really well, members of the team who has a good memory and they remember facts, or members who are organized, members who can type fast, members who are creative, and then other talents and strengths that they have in common as a team that doesn't have to be school related. And then they can write a team pledge that states their expectations of how every member of your team will be treated and contribute to the work of the simulated congressional hearing. And then just some expectation needs to be 5 sentences in length, but no longer than 10. So how do we get there? We build that relational capacity. So when we get to the point of students are working together on their simulated congressional hearings, after going through the curriculum, they already have that trust, that honesty, that connection that is needed. Okay. So, building relational capacity includes inclusive room designs, themes and shared vision and goals, mutual accountability, whole class interactions, group events and traditions, shared experiences, equitable and culturally relevant spaces. And it also, something that's really important to me is to plan consistent opportunities for student voice. So you're going to allow space for choice, making connections to student lives outside of the school, showing that you value their insight and placing their voices at the center of the work that's being done, and reminding students that their voices can be levers of change beyond the classroom. It's kind of the whole purpose of them going through this curriculum and working through the simulated congressional hearings, so that we have students who are civic minded, have students that can go out into the world and be those change makers that we want them to be. So next, habit 6, synergize, working together. It is all about alignment. So in Delaware, we have already social studies lessons that are provided to us by the state of Delaware, right? So we got to get those done. It comes from the Department of Education. We got to get those done. But we have We the People. So what you want to do is work on how We the People aligns with lessons that you may already have from your state, your Department of Education. So Delaware worked on a document where we went through each unit of the We the People curriculum and each lesson, and we worked on seeing how it aligns with our standards and how it aligns with lessons that was already given to us. So that is another step that you may want to work on with your team or your grade level teams on how you provide some of that instruction. So in Delaware, we work on this with 4th, 7th, and 8th grades. I've done it for the past 3 years in 4th grade. So you can see in this picture here, we have hold on, sorry. We have the We the People lesson, the unit. This is unit 2. We have the standard. This is 7th grade. What shaped the founders thinking about government? And then we have the DOE, Delaware Department of Education lessons that align with that We the People unit and lesson. So then you can see how you can pull different resources, activities, strategies from both curriculums together to create that learning. There is an online component of each of these textbooks. And some of them come in English and Spanish, which is great, which is great because we do have those English language learners. We have the first one up here, you can see, is for our low level readers. Then we have the next one, which I use with my grade 4 students. And then we have our secondary, which is middle school and high school books that we use. So here is just a larger picture of kind of what that alignment looks like with the We the People lesson. This is the first unit, Unit 1, Purpose of Government. So the We the People lesson, and then you'll see on the other side the Delaware lesson that kind of aligns with that. So that just helps us to combine both of those things that are necessary in order to get the information across to our students. All right. The next thing that I did that I found was super, super important after my first year, I implemented this in the second year because I found that students had a hard time communicating with each other, working in groups, providing feedback to each other, editing with each other. So develop a tool to help guide the peer feedback and editing process. And this is habit 5. Seek first to understand, then be understood, and also helping to sharpen the soul, providing some of those SEL tools for communication. So this is a Kagan cooperative learning strategy. It's called Rally Coach. And I started first using this in math, talking about a math strategy. How did you solve the problem? So you would have one student talking through how to solve a math problem, and the other student is providing coaching while the student is solving the problem. And I thought, how could I use this with my simulated congressional hearing groups to get them to be able to give each other feedback, to be able to add on to what another is saying, to be able to challenge each other through this journey that they're going through. So I developed this tool that they had available to them. So they have the 3 sections, which is lending a hand. Have you thought about trying? Maybe we could check this part again. What if we tried? Let's double check this. If they had a question, how did you figure this out? What do you think about this? Can you show me how you got this answer? What do you think is the best way? Could we try explaining it a different way? And then also a section to give positive praise. That's what another thing the students struggled on. So giving them sentence starters and frames to use to kind of talk to each other and coach each other through the process. And then also at the bottom there, you can see some of those growth mindset tools, because sometimes when their person in their group is not correct, you want to give them a tool or a sentence stem to kind of work through that. So again, that's that peer pressure. It can be positive as well. So using that peer feedback and editing tool is something that I found important to use after going through my first year. All right, the logistics, organization to get you through. So a learning management system I found was important to use. We use Schoology in Delaware. So this is a place where I can add a folder into a course, and then all my students have access to it. As you can see in this bigger picture right here, it has each unit and each group. So I was able to create a folder for each group, provide resources, provide their Google Doc where they were typing in. I created a PowerPoint that I got from one of the other Maryland teachers. You can see it right down here at the bottom. It says question, answer, historical example, current example, and conclusion. So a part of their testimony, they have to answer like the overarching unit question, and then there's some follow-up questions. And then they have to provide a historical example, which they can get from their We the People learning, some of those DOE lessons, some of the extended lessons that we provide as teachers, and then a current example. And then just to round it all up as a conclusion. So each student worked on a question, and they did that within a Google Doc or a Google Slide, so where they were able to kind of work and edit and manage things together. And they all had access to it through this learning management system. I was able to provide resources to them right at their fingertips. So we know how difficult it is to give a student a computer to to say, okay, research this and go. So, in order to provide different links, appropriate links, and appropriate tools for them to just click on and go right to what they need, a learning management system, if you have that where you are, is a good resource for you as the teacher. Binders. I created binders for each group so that um, sheet that you saw with where they were getting to know their strengths, where they developed their constitution, all of those things were in there. Some of their team building things were in there. Um, if I needed to make copies of something in the book so they could mark up the text, articles, we put those things right in the binder. And when it was time to work with their group, they knew they could grab their binder. And they not only had the learning management system folder on the computer, they had their binder with resources as well. When you start your simulated congressional hearing, you want to kind of develop a folder for your judges. You can see in the middle there, there's like an event rundown. So this was the front of my folder that kind of gave the judges who were providing the feedback to students what was going to be happening. You can see some of the team names are really cute. The past founders, the good citizens, we the people, and the time travelers. And then it had their unit and what their overarching question was. Um, so that kind of helped me not only to organize the day and or the happenings of that, but it helped with the judges as well. Inside of that folder, you found like the rubric for the simulated congressional hearing. Any other things that I felt was necessary for the judge that day was in there. A thank you card from students, different things like that was all put in that folder to kind of organize their day and to help me organize everything that was happening for that day. Um, Another tool tip I have is to embed and integrate curriculum. I can speak specifically for Delaware and my school district. We use bookworms. I don't know if any other district uses bookworms in elementary, but some of the language arts books lended really well to the We the People curriculum. So we read books like Can't You Make Them Behave, King George, and Blood on the River. So I tried to align those books and that curriculum so everything kind of went in a timeline almost like a story. So they were making connections not only to what they were learning in We the People, what they were getting from the Delaware lessons, but what they were getting from our nonfiction and historical fiction books as well. So they're able to kind of connect all of those things together. So embed and integrate as much as possible. Um, Use testing season as much to your advantage. So I would provide the curriculum throughout the year. And then testing, I know it's hard, hard, hard. It's a crunch for time. I know everyone across the United States has a crunch for time for social studies, and it's so, so, so important. But use testing season. So when the students were doing their state testing, after state testing, we're not really teaching curriculum at that point. So use that time to have students working their groups, use that time to have students build their testimonies so that they're ready to go for the end of the year. And this is elementary school. I know some of you guys are secondary, so it's a little different. But in elementary school, we use that time so that we're doing it at the end of the year. And I know some of you guys in secondary do it like mid-year because you have different semesters or blocks or how that works. But testing season, use that time as well. A couple other things. Center for Civic Ed, civiced.org is a great resource because it has all of the tools you need, extra resources you can use. iCivics.org has a bunch of cool videos and games and a whole bunch of resources. I know someone mentioned online learning. iCivics.org is another place to go. Center for Civic Ed also has something called 60-second civics, where it has 60-second videos on different concepts and topics that can be used as openers. If you have that learning management system, you can pop the link right in there and students can use that as a resource as well. So check out those websites. definitely a good tool and resource to use. I'm trying to think if I have anything. Um, just the major thing, connection comes first. The more connection you have with your students and the more connection they have with each other, the more they can challenge each other and the more you can challenge them. Um, I do have a couple of links that I'll pop in the chat as soon as I close this out. But I have, and again, I won't take credit for these resources because I've collected some from teachers everywhere. But I do have like a guide to help you get started with your SEH. There's a lot of templates of letters you can give to parents, your judges, your principal. I have, of course, that. Tool you can use when forming your groups. I'll pop that link in there. But I just have a bunch of resources. I'll pop the links in the chat and you can hold on to them. And if you have any questions, please email me and I will send you whatever I have. I think that's it.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Chanel. One of the things, I mean, that I love, number one, is just the sharing is caring mentality that is our We the People and Project Citizen mentors. I love that you all are so willing and open to be sharing all of these resources that you've created along the way. And if even if you are not an elementary teacher, you are a middle school teacher, high school teacher, these are still resources that are actually very helpful. I mean, if you're middle or high, it's very easy to scaffold, but it's the same considerations as to, how do you formulate your smaller groups with your students? How do you organize the day? A lot of that does not change whether you're doing this in elementary, middle, or high school. So, those are going to be really tremendous resources. And thank you so much in advance for sharing those. If Let's see if Chanel and Jessica wouldn't mind at least dropping your email in the chat. That would be lovely. And then I do want to just bring up a couple comments that came up in the chat. Um, so Bonnie brings up one of the best ways to get schools and districts on board is to utilize certainly We the People as part of the ELA curriculum. And she's in Arizona and they had crosswalks to include ELA. I would suggest also that Project Citizen can serve a similar cross-curricular function. If you can do this as part of ELA, if for Project Citizen, if you're doing something that involves some statistical research, or if the students are choosing a project that involves some sort of environmental science, that is a really good opportunity for some cross-curricular work. One of the things we strongly believe in at the center is the idea that civics is everywhere. And so when the students get a chance to work on civics projects in other contexts, that can just, kind of highlight that for them as well. So we've got lots of great sharing happening in the chat with folks' contact information. Chanel's resources are in there as well. And then we've got just some great cheerleading from Doug to say that you're the ones who are preserving America, which is very similar to what Francine said. Then there's no work being done that's more important than the work that you're doing. So that's fantastic, and I'm sure that all of our presenters today couldn't agree more. So I think we've got contact info, resource info. And I will be sure to also collect this from the chat and send it to you as part of the follow-up email after this evening's presentation. So I think we've managed to answer all the questions, but thank you all so much. And if you have additional follow-ups or if you want to be put in touch with your state's specific sponsor of We the People or Project Citizen, I'm happy to help make that connection if you don't know who that person is. I'm sure they'll also be happy to provide you with some support. in addition to, of course, our amazing mentors. So, I know lots of you have different contexts that you're working in. So if you have questions, we're happy to help you think through that. So with that, I'm going to close out the chat or I'm sorry, I'm going to close the recording, but I can still take a couple questions. But I do want to officially thank Chanel Rogers, Janelle Mahoney, and Francine Engel for their presentations this evening. I hope that you all feel enthusiastic and excited to kick off the school year and really get your students civically engaged this school year. So thank you all for everything. And we'll do a quick stop here.